In Brussels today, the debate over Europe's handling of frozen Russian assets entered a sharper, more urgent phase. Belgian Foreign Minister Maxime Prevot stepped before the cameras, delivering a warning that went beyond national policy. It was a message aimed at the entire European Union. He spoke firmly and without hesitation, warning that Europe's financial credibility was at stake. In his own words, for Belgium, the confiscation of Russian sovereign assets is not an option, insofar as, in the opinion of a large number of experts, such confiscation, motivated by a political decision rather than stemming from a legal or judicial decision, could generate a terrible systemic shock across all European financial markets and deal a severe blow to the credibility of the euro. Prevot's words carry weight, not only because Belgium hosts the Euroclear financial clearinghouse, which holds billions in Russian assets, but because his warning highlights the risk of triggering instability in Europe's most sensitive institution, its common currency. To understand the magnitude of this debate, we must go back to the decisions made in 2022 when Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine prompted Western governments to impose sweeping sanctions. Among them was the freezing of around 200 billion euros in Russian central bank assets within the European Union. At the time, leaders emphasized the move as a temporary measure, a way to deny Moscow access to its war chest. But now, more than 3 years into the conflict, Ukraine's allies face mounting bills for military aid, reconstruction planning and humanitarian assistance. Calls have grown louder, particularly from Washington and some Eastern European capitals, to go beyond freezing those assets and begin confiscating them outright to fund Ukraine's survival. It is in this context that Belgium's foreign minister sounded his alarm. His argument is simple. Seizing state assets without a judicial framework undermines trust in the eurozone's financial order. If Europe breaks precedent and confiscates the wealth of one sovereign, what assurance remains for others who rely on the stability of European institutions? Experts warn that such a precedent could deter international investors, particularly from Asia and the Middle East, from placing reserves in euro-denominated accounts. Confidence in the euro, carefully built over decades, could weaken in a matter of months. Maxime Prevot's choice of words, terrible systemic shock, was not made lightly. In financial language, a systemic shock means not just market turbulence, but a potential chain reaction, capital flight, rising borrowing costs, and downward pressure on the euro's exchange rate. The minister's stance also underscores a rift within the European Union itself. While countries like Poland and the Baltic states urge immediate confiscation as both punishment for Russia and relief for Ukraine, others, such as Germany, France, and now Belgium, argue caution. Legal scholars support this cautious line. International law traditionally distinguishes between freezing assets during conflict and seizing them permanently. Crossing that line without a solid legal mechanism could expose Europe to lawsuits from Russia and other states, or even retaliation against European assets held abroad. At stake is not only Ukraine's funding, but Europe's financial sovereignty. If the EU were to act politically rather than legally, critics warn it could appear selective, applying rules against some nations while protecting others. That perception could erode Europe's claim to uphold a rules-based order. For Belgium, the warning also reflects its own financial exposure. Euroclear, headquartered in Brussels, manages more than 100 trillion euros in securities. The firm has already generated billions in profits from immobilized Russian assets, profits that the EU has agreed to redirect toward Ukraine. But Prevot insists that profits are different from principle. The assets themselves must remain untouched. This is the crux of the Belgian argument. Channeling profits is legally defensible, but outright seizure risks detonating a financial minefield. Prevot's comments also come at a time when the eurozone faces other pressures: sluggish growth, high energy costs, and a fragile recovery from the pandemic. Any shock to confidence could derail efforts to stabilize inflation and maintain cohesion across the bloc. In the corridors of Brussels, diplomats describe this as a test of Europe's credibility. Can the EU support Ukraine robustly while preserving the legal and financial norms that underpin its global standing? For Ukraine, the stakes are existential. Kyiv has long argued that Russia must pay for the destruction it has caused. For Western taxpayers, the appeal of using frozen Russian money is clear. It would ease the burden on domestic budgets. But for Belgium's foreign minister, the message is stark. Justice cannot come at the cost of financial collapse. Confiscation is not an option, he stressed, reminding allies that political decisions must not override judicial foundations. As this debate continues, one thing is certain: Europe is walking a tightrope. On one side lies the urgency of funding Ukraine, on the other the stability of the euro, the backbone of the continent's economic life. For now, Belgium's voice is clear, cautioning that the price of seizing Russian assets could be paid not in Moscow, but in the very heart. For Belgium, the confiscation of Russian sovereign assets is not an option, insofar as, in the opinion of a large number of experts, such confiscation, motivated by a political decision rather than stemming from a legal or judicial decision, could generate a terrible systemic shock across all European financial markets and deal a severe blow to the credibility of the euro.